All right, welcome back. You're still watching In the Game on News Central TV and Favor E2I. It's time to go straight to the world of football. And some interesting things happening in our football in Nigeria, Africa, and beyond. Now, just to let you know, Raheem Sterling has become the highest profile member of Chelsea's so-called bomb squad, a group of deregistered first-team players training in isolation as the club seeks to offload unwanted stars. Now, once regarded as England's standout performer at the Euro 2020, Sterling now faces a season in exile with £30 million in wages, complicating any exit negotiations. Now, the practice of isolating players has sparked growing criticism, with FIFA regulations warning clubs against conduct that could be deemed abusive. Now, player unions have also urged intervention as concerns mount over the impact of enforced exclusion, restricted facilities, and uncertainty on players' career, raising questions about welfare and contractual rights within the elite football. Now, this afternoon, we've decided to talk about this, and joining us joining us in our studio this afternoon is a FIFA-approved representative, also a sports lawyer. Ibrahim Abiola joins us this afternoon. Ibrahim, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
I mean, a very interesting topic for conversation this afternoon as regards, players, exile clubs, and the way they treat players. Legally, I would like to ask, can a club deregister and isolate, a contracted first-team player without violating FIFA regulations?
Okay, firstly, when you talk about this situation, you have to look at what the law says when it comes to FIFA. The FIFA regulation on the transfer of players, especially Article 13, talks about this. It says that players and clubs have to respect the contract between them. So when you look at Article 14, it explains what happens when they do not respect it. That's when they want to terminate. Normally, you are meant to terminate at the expiry of the duration or by mutual termination. But there are times when you terminate for just cause. That's when the party is not expected to reasonably continue with the contract. And there's also what we call abusive conduct, when a party is forcing the other party to terminate or change the terms of the contract. So for Raheem Sterling, you can say that the club is trying to form abusive conduct to ensure that he terminates the contract. But we've seen a case where this was not the case. And there's a Romanian club, CFR 1907 Cluj, against a Brazilian player, Bruno Figueira Rodrigues, where the club deregistered the player, and the player decided to terminate the contract. Although there were issues because the club offered to settle with the player, offered to have negotiations with the player and mediation, but the player refused. So the FIFA DRC aired in the player's favor, but CAS aired that the player could not terminate because he did not allow the club to rectify the situation.
All right, what actually constitutes player abusiveness? I mean, we see clubs saying, using that particular angle, but when you look at the players' line of action, they are most of the time forced to train alone. Sometimes they might not even, give them the opportunities of other players. So what constitutes abusive conduct?
When you talk about abusive conduct, you have to talk about a sufficient breach, which shows that the player was not allowed to participate. For example, under the laws, there is what we call sporting just cause. When a player plays less than 10% of the club's games during the season, then they can terminate. But the issue is you can't terminate during the competition period. It has to be within 15 days after the end of the season. So for Raheem Sterling, for him to be able to enjoy this privilege, he has to show that he has tried to reach out to the club to rectify this, and the club has not done anything. Also, you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, because there are issues when the player is not fit, the player is injured, or when the player does not meet up with the club standard. So the player cannot claim abusive conduct when he does not meet up with the club requirements.
Now, we also saw the case of Alexander Isak. I mean, might not be exact the same, but he wanted to move. He wanted to leave Newcastle to Liverpool, and he was vocal about it. Newcastle did not, buy that particular line of thought, and he was excluded from the team. After a while, he wanted the right money. Now, some are saying players are not protected enough. I mean, cases of where we have unions. What do you think they can do in such situations? In Nigeria, we also have players' union, but sometimes it feels like they're not working or they're not currently working. What can be done from the players' union's angle and also from the players' representative to further protect the players' rights and when things like this happens?
When it happens like this, the first thing is to look at the contract between the player and the club. Because there are times when the contract states that if the player is registered, he's able to play for junior teams in the squad and get the same salary. So what happens is most of these players usually pay attention to what the law has to say regarding these situations. For example, there was a case, Mark Gullon, he signed with a club, Johar Darutazim. So the club refused to provide him with flight tickets. The club did not allow him to train with the club when he resumed. Also, the club did not allow him to get in and be registered with the club. But what players need to know that when this happens, you have to show that you try communicating with the club, and the club refused. So we have to ensure that there are written conversations between you and the club to be able to sufficiently show that you try to identify the situation with the club, but the club refused. That's why when you see players go on strike, clubs do not terminate the contract immediately. What they do is be vocal about it to show that they are ready to integrate the player back into the squad, but the player is being adamant.
Interesting. I mean, this conversation can go on and on, but also looking at what we've spoken about so far, we're going outside now to the growing trend of players' exile influence. How does it influence, the future of a player? I mean, when it leads to the clauses or new legal precedents, what do you think can happen with what we're seeing at the moment, and what are the fears, what are the concerns in the nearest future?
Well, when players go on strike, it's becoming rampant. It's becoming a very dangerous precedent. Because there is an issue where the club decides to find the player. Most likely it's 2 weeks salary, like we see in the case of Gyökeres when he was going to Arsenal. And the club needs the money to buy another player. So when players see that they can go away with going on strike and just getting fined, they will continue doing that. But for clubs, it's very dicey. Because if you decide to terminate at that point, what you will get is the residual value of the player's contract and not the player's market value. So clubs will not be able to terminate the contract when players decide to go on strike. What they will do is to get the player fined. What I want to see a situation where a club would approach FIFA disciplinary chamber to ensure that the player is adequately punished and the club who is making him go on strike is also punished, so that it will deter other players from doing the same.
All right. Also, for Nigerian players especially, some players are not well educated. I mean, some of them get contracts signed without looking at what it is. They just feel, oh, there's a mouth-watering amount of money. After the money, they don't check the clauses. And then when they are tied or when they are prevented from making moves or when something happens, they feel that they are caged. What can be done to these players? I mean, do you think that players should always get a legal representative whenever they are going to sign deals? Because we've seen agents follow the players. Some of the agents are, greedy. They just want to get the monies and move out. What can also be done to also ensure that these players know what they are doing and what they are signing whenever they make deals, so as not to get issues in the near future?
Well, the first step here is to ensure that all agents are registered agents and licensed under FIFA. Because in Nigeria, we have a lot of agents who are not licensed under FIFA and who represent these players. So these agents convince the player that they don't need to get a lawyer and they'll be able to do everything the lawyer needs to do. Because when it comes to clauses with a player and the club, when a contract starts, the player is like the baby of the club. But at some point, the club gets a new baby and the player gets pushed aside. At that point, the player needs to realize that the club would not have your interest at that. The club will always have his own interest because the club is a business. So players need to ensure that they get a proper lawyer to be able to go through the clauses and tell them their rights and responsibilities under the contract. All
right. Now, finally, if I let you go, if I'm a player, let me use the case of Victor Osimhen. I mean, extended his contract with Napoli before now, just so that he doesn't go for free. If Napoli wants to make money out of him, then the release clause was met. And then Napoli wanted more money from Galatasaray or from even the Saudi club. In cases like that, where there's a release clause and the release clause has been triggered, and the club is still trying to be greedy with more money, what can the player do in such a situation? Knowing fully well that, you could be relegated also. At the point in time, he was not training with the first team, no football in action for him. What do you think he can do? Should he go straight to FIFA, report, I have a release clause, it has been triggered, and the club is saying, I cannot still go? And what can be done to that in that situation?
When you look at the leagues, there's one league that has been able to do this effectively. That's La Liga. In La Liga, if you have a release clause, what the club buying you needs to do is to ensure they withdraw the money in cash and take it to La Liga office to pay. Once it's paid, you are free from your contract. So what other leagues need to do is to ensure that there is a rule in place. For players, there's what we call fair market value, which is the value that a player will be meant to be sold based on his age, his injury history, his performance, and the likes. So what they need to do is ensure that these rules are enshrined to ensure that once a release clause is met, if the club has no other option than to allow the player leave.
All right, Ibrahim, I wish we could go on and on, but time is now a friend. But I must say a big thank you to you. But your message to footballers, club sides, if you want to have an opportunity to just talk to them on this issue we're talking about, when you look at players being deregistered, what can be done?
The one thing you need to know is that football is not based on emotions. Football is now a business. When we started World Cup in 1930, football was about talent and about passion. But now football is a business, a multi-billion-dollar business. So you need to know that in business, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. So when you're signing a contract with the club, make sure you understand everything in the contract. You should ask the club to give you time to understand the contract before signing. Because once it is signed, it is very rare to be able to change the terms of that contract.
All right. Thank you very much, Ibrahim Abiola, for your time. We look forward to having you again in our studios to talk about the legal aspect when it comes to the world of football in the world.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.